Fast version. 1, 2, 3.
I'm mooning over you, my little moon dove, with a sad and broken heart. I'm mooning over you, my little moon dove, for soon the time will come to part.
Hi there. To begin our presentation, we will start by introducing ourselves. At the bottom of each slide, each photo seen here will be inputted so you are able to keep track of which one of us is speaking. My name is Kayla Maki. I received my ACSW in 2018, and I am currently finishing up my studies here at Queen's University with a BA in psychology.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Ferreira, and I'm a third-year nursing student at Queen's University.
Hello, my name is Niusha, and I'm a third-year gender studies student at Queen's University.
Hi, I'm Amanda Edmonds, and I am a fourth-year health studies student at Queen's University. To begin our presentation, we will introduce Doris Wishman, providing some background information on her life and career. We will then show two separate clips which offer an in-depth look at Doris's personality and her role on the set of one of her films. We will also walk through a timeline of her film career and the different film eras which she contributed to. We will then move on to look at the social impact which Doris and her films have had. We will wrap up our presentation by posing and discussing multiple questions surrounding the topic of pornography and how pornography relates to feminism, art, and the regulation of pornography.
Thank you for joining us for a presentation on the legendary Doris Wishman. Doris Wishman was born in Manhattan, New York, and while she never actually revealed her age, her passport carried a date of birth for April 23, 1920. This would place Doris at the age of 82, stated Michael Bowen, an individual who is writing her biography. Doris unfortunately passed away in 2002 due to complications from lymphoma, with family members believing her to be around 77 to 90 years old at the time of her passing. In terms of Doris Wishman's career, she was an American film director, screenwriter, and producer, most well known for her work within the sexploitation film genre during the early 1960s. With no formal training, Doris turned to filmmaking as a hobby following the passing of her husband in 1958, going on to direct and produce upwards of 30 feature films over her 4-decade career. Doris went on to become one of the most prolific female filmmakers at the time, placing her own spin on the film in the process. Here is a short clip of Doris Wishman on the Conan O'Brien Show on March 7, 2002. This clip does an excellent job at displaying Wishman's character and strong personality. It is interesting to note how the host, Conan, is uncomfortable with stating the name of one of her films, and Doris is seen trying to ask him why.
Yeah, and I like it.
You're not scaring me, Conan.
It's not supposed to scare you.
But if you're
It's supposed to make you love me.
Let me tell you something. If
Yes.
you want to scare me, just look at me naturally. Mean, huh?
He could be a movie
I'm a
star.
mean lady.
You are a mean lady.
Oh, yes.
But I'm going to keep talking to you because I enjoy it. And we have to kill more time. Now,
I beg your pardon.
let me ask you about your system. You start with a title.
Yes, I do.
A lot of people don't start with a title. They start with an idea. You start with a title, and then you work from there. Is that true?
Because I'm different.
That's good. That's the point I was making. You're different. You have a new movie coming out. Why don't you tell people the title of your new movie? It's coming out this weekend.
Well, the movie let me tell you first about a movie that I finished about 6 months ago called Satan Was a Lady. Mm-hmm. It's excellent because Satan really is, she really was a lady.
I'm sure of that, yes.
Yeah. I knew you would be. Starring Honey Lauren, who's a fantastic actress. And I completed my next film, the film that you're referring to, I believe, about 3 months ago.
And that film is called?
Go ahead and tell her.
Do I have to tell you?
Yeah, it's just we want to promote the movie, so don't you want to say the name of your new movie?
Well, it's called Dildo Heaven. Why are you blushing, Conan?
Wishman's campy, grindhouse exploitation films were categorized as such: nudies, roughies, chessies, and slashers. However, she had 3 distinct eras, although she briefly ventured into hardcore under the assumed name Luigi Minicatail. Her first era was her nudie cutie era, which was in the late 50s and early 60s. This was a popular genre in the 60s where cute, mischievous young women were nude in films. Her most popular and well-known film from this era is Nude on the Moon, which was released in 1961. Her next era lasted from 1965 to roughly 1970. This was her roughy era. Roughies are violent and sexy exploitation films. Her films in this era were very formulaic, where some type of sinful sex would lead to violence. These seedy grindhouse films had a feminist feel to it, where there was a wronged protagonist that had to fight against the male-driven violent society. Even though these female protagonists are exploited throughout the film, they end up being victors in the end. By the 70s, she returned to softcore, but at this time, majority of people had a preference for hardcore films. Thus, her softcore films weren't doing so well. She was sticking to a genre that people didn't really have interest in anymore. The question became, why would an audience member pay for her softcore films when they can get the hardcore stuff for the same price? She briefly ventured into hardcore with The Haunted Pussy, which was released in 1976, under the assumed name of Luigi. She refused to admit her involvement in that hardcore film.
This next clip is another interview of Doris Wishman, giving us a behind-the-scenes look at her movies as well as her role on the set of her films.
Doing? What sets Doris apart from other exploitation filmmakers are her gimmicks. She always manages to find a different angle, like in Nude on the Moon.
You will actually see it happen. The search for a secret paradise where a strange race of moon dolls rules supreme. Man enters a new civilization. Through his eyes, you will see a fascinating and unbelievable new world. Here he discovers a nature camp on the moon.
The 2 scientists decide to go to the moon, which they do. When they get to the moon and they're exploring, they find this nudist colony. And of course they're aghast because they've never seen anything like it.
I have summoned you all here for a most important matter. Are these 2 strangers who have suddenly appeared in our midst our friends, or do they come as enemies?
They only have 3 weeks there. They must go back to Earth or else they will die. The younger of the 2 scientists doesn't want to go back because he falls in love with the Queen.
Now, Jeff, really, remember what we came here for. Now, come on, will you please? We've got to do some work.
I was speaking to the Queen here.
Yes, but she doesn't speak. Now, you know that. Jeff, you're acting like a schoolboy.
You know what? I feel like a schoolboy. I've never felt like this in my life. We are getting along very well.
But don't forget we're scientists.
Okay, see you later.
That's a good shot, Jeff. Take that, too.
And it had to be shown just what a great thing nudism was. So that was the whole raison d'etre, so to speak, for nudist camp pictures. But mainly is because the state of New York passed them, and there were 15 million horny people in New York ready, willing, and able to pay a couple of bucks to see some broads with no clothes on.
When regarding the span of Doris Wishman's career, it's important to acknowledge that it took place during a more prevalent patriarchal period where she worked in a male-dominated industry. We know her work was influential, but to what extent exactly? Well, to start off, her era-specific sexploitation categories, as covered in the previous slides, produced a cult following that continues to exist long after her death. While Wishman's work is often classified as inherently feminist, she herself ironically did not identify as one. However, her work as a pioneer in her field paved the way for many female directors while simultaneously working to unpack the male gaze on the bare female body. While other examples of the nudist genre, where nudity is usually represented as a fetishistic inversion of normal sexuality, Wishman's depictions of nudism function primarily as a mode of self-revelation. To elaborate, in many of her films, male and female characters alike enter the camp as a way of essentially stripping themselves of the social conventions which inhibit them from their own personal fulfillment. This was something that stood out with Wishman's films, the consistent thematic portrayals of romantic fulfillment through monogamy, which countered the prevalent masculine bachelor ideology of that time. By mid-1964, Doris Wishman had produced and directed more nudist films than any other person working within the film. In addition, she was the sexploitation genre's only female auteur. Not to mention the fact that she produced more films overall than other renowned directors of that time period, including Martin Scorsese. One way to define pornography is the portrayal of any material, either pictures or words, that is sexually explicit. This definition of pornography may pick out different types of material in different contexts, since what is viewed as sexually explicit can vary from culture to culture and over time. However, a newer alternative definition to describe pornography is sexually explicit material that is primarily designed to produce sexual arousal in viewers.
Wishman was considered a proto-feminist throughout her career. A common question asked by film buffs and scholars analyzing her work is, how can a female porn director with sexploitation films be a feminist? Her choices as a filmmaker possess proto-feminist undertones. These elements include, but are not limited to, the inclusion of females of all body types, races, social classes, ages, and sexual orientations, the use of female protagonists that drive the plot forward. They focus on females as inherently sexual beings that are often sexually repressed. Her lesbian representation. The lesbians in her films were not the butch, man-hating lesbians portrayed in the media in the 1970s. Rather, the lesbians in her stories were just that, lesbians. Wishman's rejection of the penis envy narrative, conceptualized by Freud. She claimed females did not envy the penis, but rather they wanted to escape the masculinity of it. And lastly, her use of the gaze. It is ironic to say the least. She incites the viewer to watch what is unfolding on the screen, as the actresses look into the camera with a smile as they strip. Her use of cutaways during her films became comedic because she is denying the impacts and climax of the scene. In this way, Wishman undermines the idea of the male gaze. In a subtle cutaway scene, she takes away the male gaze's assumption of dominance and punishes the oppressive force, ultimately rendering the exploited women victors. Another interesting element of Wishman films is that she rejected the idea of women having to be housewives, whose sole purpose on this earth is to take care of the house, kids, and husband. Many of her female protagonists start this way, but eventually get bored and reject this ideal. By the end of the story, they trade their stick-in-the-mud husband for an exciting love affair, and trade in their dress and apron for leopard print and black lace. As creators, we must take into account how our point of view in the world impacts her art. We often include what we know in our art, whether consciously or subconsciously. Whether or not she made the deliberate decision to include feminist undertones in her work is still up for debate. But as a female porn director, she carried with her her beliefs, values, and biases, which ultimately spilled into her films. Thus, pornography, in general terms, can be considered feminist when it is created by a woman.
Throughout history, we have seen the depiction of nude men and women used as the focal point within many genres of art. This raises the question and long-debated topic on whether pornography should be considered art, as well as should the use of nudity within art be considered pornographic. The line between pornography and art has always been a blurry one, with pornography generally being associated with the key characteristics of being sexually explicit and aimed at sexually arousing its viewers. In debating this topic, art historians have often compared famous artworks such as mosaics, sculptures, and drawings which depict explicit images to that of a Playboy magazine, illustrating just how fine the line between these forms of media really is. In our modernized world today, sex and nudity are no longer something which is concealed. Rather, it is being used in quite the opposite way, as something to be exploited and treated as a commodity, becoming easier and easier to consider these types of media sources as forms of art. A recent example of this is the topless shoot which Keira Knightley did for Interview magazine, in which she expressed her motivation was to show the public what she really looked like. Tired of having her body and image manipulated by editing, she agreed to the shoot under the circumstances that nothing would be retouched or made to look bigger. She expressed how modern photography plays a big role within the issues women face with their body and body image. With images that would otherwise be considered X-rated or explicit, it was the message behind the shoot and the professional setting which they were taken in which hindered that from happening. This emphasized the need to redefine what is meant by pornography, that it is anything which the heart uses to find sexual expression outside of its intentional design for relational intimacy. It is large celebrities and magazines such as these which could be altering the way we think about pornography. Through the use of what would be considered softcore pornography within media and advertising, it tempts us into labeling this work as art. With all this considered, there surfaces another question. Would labeling pornography as a form of art further subject women to a greater sense of objectification and thus play into the idea of the male gaze?
Pornographic content has always been subject to regulation because of their potential to quote-unquote corrupt and deprave. Despite this, the state and law have rarely sought to ban such materials, attempting instead to restrict their accessibility. Censorship outcomes in Western pornographic media have rarely been predictable, noting how there are ambiguities in legal definitions of what can be categorized as pornographic. Within the nudist and sexploitation genre, there is an element of controversy in establishing what depictions may or may not be appropriate.
Thank you for listening to our presentation. We will now open up the floor for any questions or discussion.